A chill lingers over Texarkana in the spring of 1946. The town, split by the Texas-Arkansas border, is a patchwork of railroad tracks, cotton fields, and neon-lit dance halls. War has ended, but the hush that follows is uneasy. Headlines still speak of rationing and homecomings, but now a new word creeps in: phantom. At dusk, the air is thick with the scent of honeysuckle and diesel. Street lamps flicker along Broad Street, casting long shadows that stretch across empty sidewalks. In the countryside, the woods are dense, veined with narrow lovers' lanes where the moonlight pools in silver puddles. The first attack arrives with little warning. On February 22nd, a young couple is found battered and bloodied on a remote road. The newspapers call it the work of a madman, but the details are more chilling than print allows. The woman's torn dress, the man's fractured skull, the trail of footprints vanishing into the thicket. These are not the embellishments of folklore, but carefully hidden testimony. The sheriff's office issues a statement. "We are investigating all leads." The community locks its doors a little earlier. Rumors spiral through the town's cafes and church pews. "Moonlight Murders," the headlines proclaim. Night after night the fear grows, tangible as the mist that creeps from the Red River. The promise of horror is not in the violence itself, but in its silence, the sense that something unseen, patient, and methodical has crossed the border into ordinary life. The phantom's shadow falls over Texarkana, and with it, the fragile peace of post-war America begins to unravel. The year is 1946. Texarkana, a border city straddling Texas and Arkansas, is still reeling from the aftermath of war, its nights heavy with humid silence. But beneath the veneer of small-town routine, a new kind of fear is beginning to take root, one that creeps through the quiet streets and into locked bedrooms. Newspapers warn of a phantom killer stalking lovers' lanes, and the townsfolk's unease grows. With each new headline, the ordinary becomes ominous. A car parked under moonlight, a shadow in the yard, a knock at the door. Would you dare to step into such a house, knowing what was inside? As we follow the trail of the Texarkana Moonlight Murders, the details will only grow darker. If you wish to delve deeper into this chilling chapter of American history, subscribe and share your thoughts below. The story is about to intensify. Proceed with caution. Spring 1946. The war is over, but its shadow lingers in the borderlands. Texarkana straddles the invisible line between Texas and Arkansas, a city split down the middle by State Line Avenue, its brick storefronts and neon-lit diners standing as silent witnesses to the changing times. Soldiers are returning home, some with medals, others with scars, all carrying the weight of what they have seen. Rationing is ending, but the economy is still finding its footing. The city's rail yards and lumber mills hum with cautious optimism, and the local newspaper headlines shift from overseas battles to local dances and high school baseball. Yet, beneath the veneer of normalcy, Texarkana is a place shaped by its geography. The border is more than a line on a map. It is a living thing, a seam that runs through the city's heart, dividing jurisdiction, culture, and law. On one side, Texas, with its oil money and big ambitions. On the other, Arkansas, poorer, more rural, clinging to traditions. The city's twin police forces share information when they must, but rivalry and bureaucracy often keep them apart. Residents know how to use the border to their advantage. A quick step across State Line Avenue can mean the difference between one set of rules and another, between safety and suspicion. Privacy is a cherished currency in these post-war years. The city's young people, flush with the freedom of peacetime, seek out the shadows at the city's edge. Gravel roads wind out into the piney woods, leading to secluded clearings and muddy turnouts, where the only witnesses are the moon and the cicadas. These lovers' lanes are an open secret, whispered about in soda shops and church pews, tolerated by parents who remember their own youth. A car radio tuned low, the soft glow of dashboard lights, the world narrowed to two people and the hush of night. In these spaces, Texarkana's teenagers claim a fragile autonomy, carving out moments of intimacy far from prying eyes. But such privacy comes at a cost. The woods that offer concealment also breed unease. Stories circulate, some exaggerated, some all too real, about prowlers and peeping toms, about headlights vanishing into the trees and never returning. The border town's patchwork of jurisdiction means that a scream in the night can echo unanswered, lost between the counties. Some truths are so horrifying that even officials tried to bury them. In the aftermath of war, with so many wounds still raw, the community clings to routine and respectability. Yet, just beyond the reach of porch lights and police patrols, darkness gathers. The local papers, always eager for sensation, print headlines about youthful indiscretions and moral decline, but rarely mention the dangers lurking in the woods. What if this story was erased from history on purpose? The city's elders, wary of scandal, prefer silence to scrutiny. Official records are thin, memories unreliable, and rumors fill the gaps. The border itself becomes a kind of veil, obscuring the truth, allowing secrets to fester in the shadows. Texarkana in 1946 is a city on the cusp, caught between war and peace, tradition and change, light and darkness. Its geography and its culture conspire to create spaces both hidden and exposed, where the ordinary rituals of youth become fraught with danger, and where the line between safety and terror is as thin as the border that splits the city in two. In the spring of 1946, Texarkana's ordinary routines were interrupted by a rhythm of unease. The city, straddling two states and split by railroad tracks, had always been a place where stories traveled fast. But after the first attacks, a subtle current of fear began to pulse beneath the day's business. Newspapers, delivered with the morning milk, began to report on a mysterious assailant haunting the lovers' lanes and backroads. Headlines hinted at a pattern: couples isolated by night, targeted with chilling precision. The facts were sparse, but the implications multiplied with every retelling. In the weeks following the initial crimes, lawmen from both Texas and Arkansas convened, their meetings clouded by cigarette smoke and mutual suspicion. Official statements were cautious, careful not to incite panic, yet whispers in barber shops and church pews wove together a different narrative. The description of a masked figure, face hidden, eyes glinting in the dark, began to circulate. Some swore they'd seen him drifting between the trees along Richmond Road or lurking near the edge of Spring Lake Park. The image was indistinct, shifting with every recounting: a sack over the head, holes cut for eyes, or a face obscured by shadow. What began as a police sketch became something else entirely in the collective imagination. Despite mounting anxiety, many refused to believe a pattern was emerging. Isolated incidents, insisted the Gazette, echoing the reassurances of local authorities. Yet the similarities between the attack's timing, victims, method were impossible to ignore. In the archives, reports from the period show a careful avoidance of the word serial. The term was not yet part of the public lexicon, and to invoke it would have been to admit a terrifying possibility. Some files from these early weeks were later sealed, their contents withheld from public view. The reasons given were procedural, but the effect was to deepen the shadows around the case. As the city tried to maintain its composure, folklore began to fill the gaps left by official silence. Children dared each other to walk the empty roads after dark, while adults double-checked their locks and drew their curtains tight. Stories of the phantom killer grew with each retelling, embroidered with details borrowed from nightmares and dime novels. The figure became both a warning and an explanation, a shape onto which the community could project its fears. In the absence of answers, speculation flourished. Some claimed the attacks were the work of a vagrant. Others whispered about a jilted lover or a deranged war veteran. The war had ended only months before. The wounds, both visible and invisible, were still raw. The notion that such violence could erupt in their own backyards felt unthinkable to many. Think it couldn't happen now? That's what they thought then. The city's faith in its own safety became a kind of shield, fragile and easily pierced. Law enforcement, meanwhile, struggled to keep pace with the growing sense of dread. Patrols were increased, roadblocks set up, and curfews quietly encouraged. Yet the darkness between the streetlights remained impenetrable. Each new report, each breathless headline added to the sense that something unseen was moving just beyond the edge of reason. The patterns in the violence were there for those who looked closely, but most chose not to see, hoping that denial could hold the horror at bay. In these early days, the story of the Texarkana Moonlight Murders was still being written, its details shifting and uncertain. The community's refusal to acknowledge the pattern would, in time, become part of the legend itself, a testament to the ways fear can be both ignored and magnified, shaping the narrative as much as the facts ever could. A pale dawn bled through the trees on Sunday, March 24, 1946, when the town awoke to a new kind of silence. The previous assaults had been whispered about, but now the pattern was branded in blood. Richard Griffin, 29, and Polly Ann Moore, 17, were found in a parked 1941 Oldsmobile on a lover's lane north of Texarkana. Their bodies, his slumped between the seats. Hers sprawled face down on the back, spoke a language of violence that no one in Bowie County had ever heard. The car's windows were fogged, the doors shut tight, and the keys still in the ignition. The scene was clinical in its horror. 2 lives ended by bullets to the back of the head. The killer's method precise, ritualistic, and chillingly silent. If walls could talk, these would only scream. Sheriff W. H. Presley and the Texas Rangers arrived to a congregation of gawkers, their boots sinking into the muddy verge, their faces pale with the same question: who could do this and why? The local paper, the Texarkana Gazette, would soon print the headline, "Double Murder Shocks Community." The medical examiner noted the time of death as sometime after midnight. There was no sign of robbery, only the echo of what had been 2 young people, a quiet road, and an unseen executioner. The killer had left no fingerprints, no footprints, only the certainty that this was no random act. The town's trust, already shaken, now fractured entirely. The investigation moved with an urgency that bordered on panic. Deputies canvassed the area, questioning farmers and night watchmen, but the darkness had hidden everything. The only witness was the morning itself, and it offered nothing but dew and silence. Rumors multiplied. Some said the killer was a returned soldier. Others whispered about a local man with a grudge. The Rangers, led by the taciturn Manuel Lone Wolf Gonzalez, brought in bloodhounds, but the trail was cold before it began. How many more secrets like this still rot under American soil? The townsfolk wondered, gathering in anxious knots outside churches and grocery stores. Fear became a contagion. By dusk, the city council convened in emergency session. A curfew was declared, no one under 18 allowed out after 9 p.m., and police patrols doubled along the county roads. Hardware stores sold out of locks and chains. Shotgun shells vanished from shelves. Local radio stations interrupted swing music with urgent bulletins, their voices trembling as they read the sheriff's warnings. Parents forbade their daughters from walking home alone. Couples who once courted in moonlit cars now met only under porch lights, watched by anxious mothers. The old rhythms of Texarkana, its dances, its courting, its easy laughter, were replaced by suspicion and the metallic click of deadbolts. Journalists descended from Dallas and Little Rock, their flashbulbs popping at the crime scene, their notebooks hungry for details. The story grew in the telling. Lovers Lane murders spark panic, blared the Arkansas Gazette. The press speculated about the killer's psychology, his possible motives, his likely next move. Some reporters invoked the specter of Jack the Ripper. Others quoted scripture. The town's name, once a byword for sleepy southern charm, became a cipher for terror. They said evil had a face. But what if it wore many masks? As the moon waxed, the old superstitions returned. Some locked their doors with crucifixes. Others whispered about curses, about restless spirits. The woods north of town became a borderland, half real, half nightmare, where the killer might lurk just beyond the reach of a lantern's glow. In the bars and pool halls, men argued about whether to hunt the murderer themselves. In the churches, prayers were offered for the dead, and for the living who now counted every dusk as a threat. Yet under the surface, the town's resolve hardened. Volunteers joined night patrols. The sheriff's office fielded hundreds of calls, most dead ends, but a few hinting at patterns. A stranger seen lurking near a filling station, a flashlight bobbing in the trees after midnight. The police files thickened with statements, fingerprints, and photographs of tire tracks in the mud. The sense of order so recently taken for granted now depended on vigilance, on the hope that the killer would make a mistake, leave a clue, show his face. But the pattern was set, and the fear that gripped Texarkana would not loosen its hold. The first murder had marked the town, and the shadow it cast would only grow darker. April 1946. The spring air over Texarkana is thick with the scent of budding dogwoods, yet the town's collective breath is held. The previous attacks already whispered about in church pews and at grocery counters have not faded from memory. Instead, they have become the backdrop to daily life. The fear is not abstract. It is a living, pulsing thing, growing with every dusk. The first attack was dismissed as an aberration, the second a coincidence, but the third and then the fourth, these are patterns. The town's heartbeat stutters as it realizes the pattern might not end. On April 13th, in the deep shadow of a moonless night, the pattern repeats. Betty Jo Booker, a high school band saxophonist, and Paul Martin, a friend, vanish after a dance at the VFW. Their absence is noted with increasing alarm. By morning, Paul's body is found, shot 4 times, sprawled on North Park Road. The next day, Betty Jo's body is discovered 2 miles away, near Spring Lake Park, her saxophone missing, her life ended by 2 shots. The brutality is chilling, but the randomness is worse. There is no clear motive, no obvious connection save for youth and the darkness. The ground itself seems to whisper as authorities dig for clues, but the earth yields only silence and spent shells. Survivors' accounts become the town's lifeline and its curse. Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larry, attacked weeks earlier, are now living testimonies, faces pale in the glare of flashlight interviews, voices trembling as they recount the masked man's threats and violence. Their stories are repeated, dissected, doubted, believed. Each retelling adds a layer of horror and a layer of disbelief. Think it couldn't happen now? That's what they thought then. Their words are warnings, but also a strange comfort. Survival is possible, but the cost is high. Wounds that do not heal, sleep that will not come. The effect on the town is immediate and profound. Hardware stores and pawn shops report surges in gun sales. Headlines blare. Texarkana citizens arm themselves. Nightfall brings the sound of bolts sliding home, the sight of curtains drawn tight. The city council debates curfews. Preachers thunder against evil from the pulpit. The once bustling lovers' lanes are abandoned, grass growing tall around tire ruts. The police urge caution, but the advice is drowned in the static of radio news and the clatter of typewriters. The investigation, instead of bringing order, breeds friction. Texarkana straddles the border, half Texas, half Arkansas. Each side has its own police force, its own sheriff, its own jurisdiction. The Bowie County Sheriff's Office and the Miller County authorities trade information and, sometimes, barbs. The Texas Rangers arrive, their hats and reputations large enough to fill any room, but even their presence cannot smooth the tangled lines of authority. Rumors swirl that evidence is being mishandled, that leads are lost in the shuffle. Some truths are so horrifying that even officials tried to bury them. The killer's trail, if it exists, is muddied by the press of too many boots on the ground, too many hands reaching for the same thin threads. A sense of siege settles over Texarkana. The ordinary rhythms of life, school, work, Sunday service continue, but always with one ear tuned for gunshots, one eye on the shadows. Families cluster together at night. Neighbors check on each other with forced cheer. The landscape itself seems altered. The woods and back roads that once promised privacy now threaten ambush. The deeper we dig, the more the ground itself seems to whisper. The killer is out there somewhere, moving through the same streets, breathing the same air. In the absence of answers, theories multiply. Some say the phantom is a local, others an outsider. Some whisper of a drifter or a returned soldier warped by war. The newspapers print sketches and speculation, but the killer's image remains a blank space. A sack mask, a pair of eyes, a gun glinting in the dark. Each new attack is both a headline and a warning. The pattern is not finished yet. As April turns to May, the town waits. The tension is as thick as the humid night air, and just as inescapable. The story of Texarkana is no longer just about the victims and the killer. It is about a community learning to live with fear and the knowledge that some nightmares do not end with the dawn. The spring of 1946 in Texarkana had grown heavy with dread, the air thickening as the violence escalated. The third attack, this time a double homicide, had left the community reeling. Newspapers, desperate to make sense of the carnage, seized on a new name. Phantom Killer. Headlines screamed it across the front page in black block letters, transforming rumor into legend. Phantom Slayer strikes again. The press, insatiable for details, began to paint the killer as a spectral figure, faceless, uncatchable, a shadow that slipped through the cracks of rural America. Reporters swarmed the city, their typewriters clacking out lurid copy for readers hundreds of miles away. Photographers snapped images of blood-stained gravel and broken headlights, of weeping mothers and armed patrols. The stories grew with each retelling. Some said the killer wore a white mask. Others whispered that he was a returned soldier, warped by war. Theories multiplied in the absence of answers. The phantom was no longer just a murderer. He was an idea, a myth, a vessel for every unspoken fear that haunted the border town. As the legend grew, so did the suspicion. Every neighbor became a potential suspect. Lawmen, already stretched thin, found themselves chasing shadows. The sheriff's office was flooded with tips, each more outlandish than the last. "A man with blood on his shirt," reported one caller. "A stranger buying too much gasoline," claimed another. Some suggested the killer was a local. Others insisted he was an outsider, a drifter passing through. None of the leads bore fruit. The killer remained a ghost, slipping away before the authorities could even begin to close in. The pressure mounted. Parents forbade their children to walk the roads at night. Couples abandoned Lover's Lane, its once secret promise now a memory soured by fear. Businesses closed early. Shotgun sales soared. The town's rhythm shifted, shaped by the knowledge that evil had a face. But what if it wore many masks? Each new attack seemed to confirm the worst suspicions that the killer could be anyone, anywhere, at any time. The ordinary rituals of daily life, grocery shopping, church-going, Sunday drives, were now laced with anxiety. False confessions and false leads poured in. A farmhand, drunk and desperate for attention, claimed responsibility. A local man found wandering the train yard was detained for hours before being cleared. The authorities, overwhelmed, began to fear that the killer was toying with them. The press, eager for spectacle, printed every rumor. "Masked killer may be among us," warned one headline. The line between fact and fiction blurred. The phantom's mythos grew ever more tangled. The local police, exhausted and outmatched, sent a formal request to Austin. They needed the Texas Rangers. The Rangers, legendary for their tenacity and skill, arrived in pressed uniforms and wide-brimmed hats, their boots heavy on the courthouse steps. Their presence was both reassurance and accusation, a sign that the town's own protectors were no longer enough. The Rangers brought new methods, new eyes, and a new sense of urgency. They scoured crime scenes for overlooked evidence, questioned witnesses with practiced intensity, and coordinated with Arkansas authorities to build a profile of the killer. Yet, even as the investigation intensified, the phantom's legend only deepened. The killer, it seemed, thrived on the chaos he created. How many more secrets like this still rot under American soil? The question lingered in every whispered conversation, every nervous glance. The countryside, once a place of innocence and escape, had become a hunting ground. Roads that had led to laughter and young love were now watched with suspicion, every passing car a potential threat. The spring nights grew longer. Windows were nailed shut. Dogs barked at every shadow. The phantom's reign was not just a series of murders, but a transformation, a town forced to confront the darkness at its own heart. The hunt continued, but the killer remained unseen. His presence felt in every locked door and every flickering porch light. In Texarkana, the line between reality and nightmare had grown perilously thin. In the dense, humid air of late spring 1946, Texarkana's nights throb with unease. Shadows lengthen over gravel roads where headlights glint against the blackness, and the town's pulse beats faster with every unsolved attack. The Gazette's headlines scream warnings: "Moonlight Phantom strikes again," as curfews tighten and families huddle indoors. Yet for every locked door there is a window trembling in the wind, a porch light flickering against the unknown. Investigators retrace their steps along Lover's Lane, boots crunching over beer bottles and cigarette stubs, searching for a pattern in the chaos. The killer's trail is cold, but fear is a living thing here, seeping into schoolyards and churches alike. What would you do if your child vanished on a road like this? Whispers the question through the cotton fields, echoing in every parent's mind. The town's collective breath is held, waiting for the next strike, the next headline. If you feel the chill of these haunted streets, share this story and subscribe. The night is far from over, and the darkness in Texarkana has not yet revealed its final secret. The summer of 1946 in Texarkana reached a fever pitch, the air itself trembling with the weight of dread and exhaustion. The murders had become more than a sequence of tragedies. They were a force that bent the city's daily life into unnatural shapes. By June, the authorities, pressed by the mounting terror and the ceaseless scrutiny of the national press, unleashed the most sweeping measures yet seen. Newspapers blared a police sweep, city under curfew. The city's veins, its highways and dirt roads, its alleys and rail spurs were constricted by checkpoints and roadblocks, manned by armed officers and, in some cases, jittery volunteers with shotguns borrowed from neighbors. No one passed without scrutiny. The largest coordinated manhunt in Texarkana's history unfolded in the moonlight and the dust. Officers from Texas, Arkansas, the Texas Rangers, and the FBI fanned out in overlapping patrols, each group suspicious of the other's methods, but united by the urgency of the hunt. Decoy patrols were organized. Young officers, sometimes with their wives or sweethearts, posed as courting couples in parked cars along Lover's Lane and the shadowed farm-to-market roads. They waited in the darkness, hearts pounding, revolvers hidden beneath the dashboard, hoping the killer would take the bait. Each hour dragged on, the silence broken only by the distant barking of dogs or the crunch of gravel beneath a patrolman's boots. The city's curfew, declared by both mayors Texarkana, Texas, and Texarkana, Arkansas, transformed the town into a ghostly tableau. By nightfall, shops were shuttered, neon signs flickered off, and the only movement came from the slow sweep of headlights as patrol cars crawled through the neighborhoods. Parents herded their children indoors before sunset, and even the bravest teenagers abandoned their rituals of cruising and late-night gatherings. The streets, usually lively with music and laughter, now belonged to the authorities and to the fear that stalked every corner. The police, desperate for a break, interrogated hundreds of suspects. They combed through local records, scrutinized drifters and war veterans, questioned the mentally ill and the recently paroled. Some truths are so horrifying that even officials tried to bury them. Files were sealed, interviews redacted, names erased from the official record, anything to keep public panic from boiling over or to shield the city's reputation from permanent stain. But rumors slipped through the cracks, multiplying in whispered conversations behind locked doors. Stakeouts became a nightly ritual. Officers huddled in parked cars, their breath fogging the windows, eyes straining for any movement in the fields and thickets. The city's parks and wooded outskirts were patrolled by men who had never before fired a weapon in anger, their nerves frayed by exhaustion. Some fired at shadows, convinced the killer was lurking just beyond the reach of their headlights. This wasn't folklore, it was carefully hidden testimony. Reports of strange figures, of footsteps in the brush, of fleeting glimpses of a masked man, all were logged, investigated, and more often than not, quietly dismissed. The local press, emboldened by the national attention, printed every rumor and every official denial. Headlines screamed, "Phantom still at large, is anyone safe?" Editorials demanded answers, speculated about motives, and hinted at conspiracies. The city's collective imagination, starved for explanation, fed on these stories, weaving them into a tapestry of paranoia. What would you do if your child vanished on a road like this? The question haunted every parent, every couple, every patrolman. Meanwhile, the killer, whether man, myth, or something else, remained a shadow. Each new measure, each checkpoint and decoy seemed only to deepen the sense of helplessness. The city's trust in its protectors eroded with every fruitless night. As the summer wore on, the sweeps grew more desperate, the curfews more strictly enforced, but the sense of being hunted never lifted. The phantom had become part of the city's fabric, a presence felt in every locked door and drawn curtain. In the darkness, the people of Texarkana waited, hoping for dawn, knowing that safety was a memory, not a promise. A June dusk, 1946. The fever of fear had not yet broken in Texarkana, but the air was thick with a different tension. The sense that the phantom killer, whoever he was, had slipped back into the shadows. The gunmetal dusk pressed down on the town, and the police worked late into the night, their desks layered with reports, witness statements, and the endless clatter of typewriters. The case files grew, but resolution remained elusive. In the weeks following the murder of Virgil Starks, law enforcement's desperation became palpable. The Texas Rangers, led by Lone Wolf Gonzalez, fanned out across Miller and Bowie counties, their boots caked with red clay, their eyes scanning the faces of the men who lined up for questioning. The list of suspects grew and shifted, a living thing as rumors spread like wildfire. But the phantom's identity remained a cipher, taunting the authorities with every dead end. The first suspect to draw serious scrutiny was Ul Swinney, a petty car thief with a shifting alibi and a nervous wife. Swinney's arrest sent ripples through the community. He was interrogated for days, his wife Peggy's statements contradicting and then retracting. She claimed to know who the phantom was, sometimes suggesting it was her husband, sometimes not. The police clung to her every word, but nothing she said could be corroborated. Swinney's fingerprints didn't match those found at the Starks farmhouse. No physical evidence tied him to the crimes. Still, the press circled his name and the public hungered for closure. Other suspects flickered in and out of the investigation. A local university student, a war veteran with a troubled mind, a drifter seen near the crime scenes. Each was paraded before the public, their faces briefly illuminated by the flashbulbs of newsmen. But for every suspect, there was an alibi, a lack of motive, or simply nothing at all. The town's hope for justice became a carousel of disappointment. The evidence itself seemed to dissolve under scrutiny. Ballistics experts examined the bullets and shell casings, their conclusions clouded by the limitations of 1946 forensics. The .32 caliber Colt revolver was common, the kind that could be found in 100 nightstands across the region. Tire tracks and footprints were lost to the spring rains. The killer's mask, described as a white sack with cutout eyes, was never found. The only certainty was uncertainty. In the absence of answers, speculation flourished. The Texarkana phantom became a figure of whispered legend, his image shifting with every retelling. Some said he was a returned soldier broken by war. Others whispered of a local man, a pillar of the community by day, a monster by night. The boundaries between fact and rumor blurred, and the town's collective imagination filled the void left by the investigation's failures. Yet, beneath the surface, the testimony was not folklore. It was carefully hidden testimony, statements given in fear, names redacted in official files, secrets kept by families who still lived in the shadow of the murders. The silence that followed was not born of myth, but of caution and shame. If walls could talk, these would only scream. The houses along the lonely roads, the farmhouses with their battered screen doors, held memories that would not fade. A century later, the silence is still deafening. The phantom's legend endures, but the facts remain stubbornly incomplete. The files, yellowed, brittle, heavily redacted, tell the story of a town that looked for answers and found only more questions. The suspects, once so promising, receded into the background, their lives marked by the suspicion they could never quite escape. In the final days of the investigation's fever pitch, the authorities made one last push. Roadblocks were set up along the highways. Night patrols prowled the lovers' lanes and backroads, their headlights cutting through the humid dark. But the killer did not return. The murders stopped as suddenly as they had begun, leaving behind only the echo of footsteps in the night. The phantom dissolved into rumor, his face never seen, his name never spoken aloud. The town moved on, but the terror lingered in the marrow of its bones. Texarkana's children grew up hearing warnings about the dangers of the night, and the story was retold in hushed tones at kitchen tables and schoolyard fences. The case, unresolved, became a wound that never quite healed. In the end, the phantom was not caught, not named, not understood. The investigation's climax was not a revelation, but a retreat into silence. The evidence, inconclusive. The suspects, shadows. The truth, a ghost that slipped away beneath the moonlight, leaving only questions in its wake. The spring of 1946 faded into the record books, but in Texarkana the air remained taut and unsettled. The killings had stopped, but their residue lingered in the hush of empty streets after dark, in the new bolts hammered to back doors, in the hush that fell over the town each time a car slowed too long at the side of the road. Officially, there was no further danger. Unofficially, the town's pulse never returned to its old rhythm. The murders had become a presence, a shadow cast by the moonlight itself. The files stayed open, their contents a mix of hard fact and anxious conjecture. The Texas Rangers had returned to Austin, leaving behind only their reports and the lingering questions. Sheriff Presley's office, once bustling with reporters and anxious relatives, now kept a wary silence. Some archives were deliberately sealed, so no one could read this. The case, unsolved, was preserved in a formal stasis, its evidence boxed and numbered, its photographs locked in drawers, its testimonies transcribed and filed away. Files marked Phantom Killer gathered dust, while the real phantom of fear, of suspicion, of memory remained uncontained. The survivors remembered everything. They remembered the way the killer's footsteps sounded in the gravel, the taste of blood in their mouths, the shudder of headlights on a lonely road. Their stories were collected in secret, whispered to neighbors, or scribbled into diaries that would never see print. The pain was not folklore, it was carefully hidden testimony, the kind that lived behind drawn curtains, and in the careful, watchful way people now moved through their lives. The wounds had healed over, but the scars were visible to anyone who looked. In the aftermath, Texarkana's habits changed. Theaters stopped showing late-night features. Couples no longer parked at the edge of town. Hardware stores sold out of locks and window bars, and the local police began routine patrols through neighborhoods that had once felt immune to violence. The local newspaper, which once chronicled every detail, Murdered Under Moonlight, Phantom Slayer Strikes Again, now reported on city council meetings and school picnics, but the column Inches devoted to the murders remained clipped and yellowing in family scrapbooks, reminders of a terror that would not be named aloud. Rumors grew in the vacuum left by the silence. Children dared each other to visit the crime scenes. Adults traded theories in whispers at church suppers. Some said the killer had been caught and quietly spirited away, others that he still lived among them, disguised by the banality of daily life. The legend of the Phantom Killer took root, its shape shifting with each retelling, but always returning to the same images. Moonlight on a dirt road, the echo of a gunshot, a face hidden behind a pillowcase mask. The town's collective memory became a patchwork of fact and invention, held together by fear and the need to explain the inexplicable. Outside Texarkana, the story faded into the annals of American crime, a curiosity for true crime magazines and pulp writers. But inside the town, the murders became a cautionary tale, a reason to hurry home before dark, to trust no stranger, to look twice before answering a knock at the door. The phrase, Texarkana Moonlight Murders, lingered like a warning, a reminder that evil could come from nowhere and vanish just as quickly, leaving only questions in its wake. The authorities, faced with dead ends and dwindling leads, quietly shifted their attention elsewhere. The official word was that every effort had been made, that justice had been pursued to the limits of possibility, but the files remained open, and every so often, a new detective would thumb through the brittle pages, tracing the same hopeless paths, wondering if the answer had been missed, or if it had never existed at all. The passage of time did not dilute the horror. Instead, it calcified it, embedding it in the rituals of daily life. Parents told their children not to linger after sunset. Lovers met in well-lit places. The sound of a branch tapping against a window could still send a jolt through the most stoic heart. The town learned to live with its ghosts, to fold them into the fabric of ordinary existence. In the end, the Texarkana Moonlight Murders became a story about absence of justice, of closure, of certainty. The killer's identity remained a blank space, a void that no amount of speculation could fill. The consequences endured not in the headlines but in the quiet, lasting changes to the town's way of life. The murders had ended, but their shadow remained, stretching long and cold under the moonlight, a permanent part of Texarkana's history and its haunted nights. In the pale dawn of May 1946, Texarkana's streets returned to their routines, but the shadow lingered. The phantom killer, never caught, became a legend stitched into the fabric of the town, his crimes an open wound, his motives forever obscured. Headlines faded, but porch lights stayed burning late into summer, and locks were checked twice, then once more. Fear grips city as phantom strikes again, the Gazette had declared. Now fear had become a habit. The closer you look, the less coincidence explains. Lover's Lane, a place for whispered secrets, had turned into a theater of terror. Quiet neighborhoods, once innocent, now bore the invisible scars of suspicion. Ordinary citizens, their faces half lit by moonlight, glanced over their shoulders. Every stranger was a suspect, every shadow a threat. The boundaries between the everyday and the monstrous blurred, and the line between safety and peril seemed paper-thin. Investigators pored over evidence, bootprints in mud, spent cartridges, a bloodied flashlight, each fragment a riddle. Theories flourished, then withered. Was the killer a local or just passing through? Was he driven by madness or something colder? The case files grew fat, the answers grew thin. In the end, the Texarkana Moonlight Murders left more questions than victims. Ordinary places had bred extraordinary dread. The phantom vanished, but his echo remained, a warning etched into the American night. Evil does not always wear a monstrous face. Sometimes it walks quietly among us in places we know by heart. As the archives close on Texarkana, the searchlight swings to another shadow, a rural crossroads, a vanished traveler, a new case where the ordinary will again reveal the uncanny.